mission around educating partners around best practices, et cetera. So like when Becky was like, "Hey, can you step in for, that guy who let her down at the last moment?" I was like, "Yes, I could totally step in for him."
And then we phoned a friend. Bob, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, sure, sure. My name is Bob Miller. I'm the CEO and founder of IR Game, which is a multiplayer incident response exercise platform. And I've known both Becky and Ethan for almost exactly the same amount of time, about 3 years, when I actually broke into one of their pre-days illegally and squatted while they actually put everybody through an exercise, which is you could trace you can trace the actual genesis of IR Game all the way back to that bold move to break the rules and come bum rush a really cool pre-day. So I have, and last night, about 4 months ago, though, I left an MSP that I was the COO of for about 7 years. So I introduced the security practice at that MSP to create an MSSP. So got a background in what we're talking about for sure.
Thank you again, both of you, for answering my very frantic texts. Uh, and we're going to roll with this today. So, being Cybersecurity Awareness Month, internally we were talking quite a bit about what can we create, what can we do to help people with Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And we really got to talking, more and more that the technical jargon, scare tactics, all of that have never worked when discussing technology at all with your end users, and especially when it comes to security. And for a long time as an industry, we leaned really heavily into the it's not if, it's when. And while the likelihood of it being a win scenario is absolutely true, your end users are only going to consume that for so long before you have to pivot to the next part of conversation. And one way to do that is tabletop exercises. So Bob is a great guest for today. Another way to do that is really pivoting your conversation and having business level conversations with your customers. So we have a bit of an outline that Wes and I had developed. We're going to try and get through some of that. We'll pivot in some areas, and you're along with us today. So Cody, if you can pull up the first poll for us, we'll go ahead and share a poll of when you talk to end users about cybersecurity, what is your biggest challenge? So Bob, Ethan, their answers, and we can kind of talk through what they come back with. But some of the things I hear a lot is that they tune out when it's too technical. They don't see security as their responsibility. They only care after something goes wrong. And I'm just not sure how to explain risk in simple terms. So,
You need all of the above button.
all of the above. I should have put in all of
Well,
the above.
I was going to say yes and all of the above, and maybe one other one, which is, wasn't I already paying for security already? Weren't you already
Ooh,
doing that? Anyways,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
um,
Um,
I guess I got to answer the poll, so
yeah.
I'll answer the poll.
I don't think we can answer the poll because we're hosts and panelists.
Oh, okay. Well, can't stuff the ballot box. Fair enough.
Yeah. I like that. We can't sway to the thing we want to talk about.
Right. Right.
Leo, you really hit it well that we're always happy with whatever checkpoints throwing our way, or whatever tools we have. We already have these things, or isn't that your job? Like, aren't you already keeping us safe? So, thinking about that, what are some tips? What have you used in the past to gauge your audience? Because one size does not fit all when it comes to cybersecurity conversations. What are some tricks that you guys have used in the past to kind of gauge an audience when you're walking in to a room?
Bob, you want to start, and I'll
Yeah,
go
that's
on.
fine. I mean, what's been interesting to me is that when you do walk into a room and it's already that's already meeting a setup to maybe talk about cybersecurity. When you walk in, you can usually tell by how tense the individuals are in the room about how this is going to go, right? So I'm big into body language and such. So as soon as you walk in, if they're all say hello, but once they sit in their chairs, for me, it's how much moving around are they doing in their seat that gives me the first clue about whether or not they're comfortable about having a conversation related to this in most cases.
Uh,
Um, Go ahead.
and
Yeah.
well, what I was going to add on is like this is where like I say every business is really a relationship business. And what
Yeah.
I mean by that is like if you treat it transactionally, if you aren't thinking of these as
Right.
real relationships, you're going to be stuck. If you're thinking, I just sell them widget X or layer on my services for widget X, right? Like you're not going to pick up, Bob, on, Becky being uncomfortable in her seat because you're not thinking of it as a relationship.
Hmm.
And each one of these I did have to approach differently, right? I had some of my clients who were really technical. There was a guy who like he would come to me with solutions. I want a Linux, you know, instance of X running this NAS because I read that this GitHub we can put in here and it will be more secure than XYZ. Like he would go jargon for, you know, to me, hand to hand combat jargonese, right? Um, but then we had a client who was a large electrical contractor, right? They would go out do commercial outfitting of buildings, of running the electrical work, etc. That that leadership team, they just needed it made simple, like in stories they could understand, and what are those ROIs? And so it is understanding where your audience is coming from. So asking asking questions is the best way to start to figure out how to get there, right? You need to start with, hey, like, yes, you have an agenda. We're talking about this today. What is your awareness of the cybersecurity landscape? That might be as a good opening. See how aware they are on that, right? Start general.
Yeah,
Um,
I think you got to put it in front of them in a context that they can understand, right? So it needs to have something related to their business. You need to know their business well enough so that you know their business processes, because every company is a manufacturing product manufacturing line, right? That's how it works. So stuff comes in the door, stuff gets processed, stuff goes out the door. Every customer has a conveyor belt, and they're doing work, different kinds, but they all have the similar challenges. And the idea is the more you know about their business and how they actually go about doing it, it does become easier when you can bring security concerns to them and put it in context of the kinds of things they already do for a living and are doing for a living right now, the processes they're using, anything related to how they operate their business. So to your point, Becky, it's all about really understanding that customer well enough that you can put the conversation in a very close context to what it is they do for a living, right? And show them that this is a risk mitigation element. Um, a lot of times you could just do the math and say, well, this is you don't sell fear, uncertainty, and doubt. That never works.
Mhm.
You really have to engage them as human beings and say, well, look, this is the kind of things that have occurred for other companies like you. As long as we have the right layers in place, we can mitigate this, right? And we can figure out how to afford it over time if we need to, but we need to put it on the plan. So that's another, really reasonable way to start that conversation.
I like that. So the poll results are not that surprising. They only care
Of course not. Yeah.
after something goes wrong. I am a bit surprised though that they don't see security as their responsibility. Outranks, they tune out when it gets too technical. So we're still seeing end users that still just assume that their MSP has it. They don't need to play a part in it. And we'll readdress that because I think that tabletop games can really help view that in a different way, that it's not just the tool's job. Security is everybody's job. So I hear pretty frequently from MSPs, though, that the security conversations continue to be more challenging with existing customers. Your new customers coming in are going to buy the package you're selling. They're going to engage with you in a different way because they're seeking out either an MSP for the first time or a replacement, a new MSP. Did you ever have any luck trying to get existing users, existing people to buy into the next security thing?
I mean, yes, but it takes setting up that conversation because you don't want them coming to you or seeing you as every time you show up here, you are trying to sell me something, right? It gets back. Jared, I think, put it great in chat
Mhm.
about, if you're not being that VCIO, and we can all debate what that term means, but if you're not being that advisor to them, they're going to see you showing up to either fix a problem or sell them something, right? Like those become the ways they see you. And so if you're not in their business and understanding it, then it becomes a challenge. Um, and it becomes important to set that expectation. Like the whole mantra I've started to use more and more, and somebody just gave me a new way of saying this. I've just blinked on what they told me it was. But the one I use is that security is not a destination, it's a journey, right? Like you are never going to get to secured, right? Like we're never going
That's
to
right.
hit that part. And if I set the conversation up from that aspect of, hey, this is a journey we are on, we're going to be doing it together and it's going to evolve, then that made the next sell down the road easier versus, oh, hey, I'm selling you this brand new widget and it's taking care of everything because it's this new widget you need from a because threat actors have pivoted. They're like, well, oh, so I'm secure again instead of saying no, 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 no. We right. So I think that's like the key thing for me. Um,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I agree with you. I think that's again, we talked about that. I think that's the right approach across the board. I'm watching the folks talking in chat too. They got really good observations about the see, but a lot of that sounds like they're really good at establishing those strategic conversations already. And I think that's the issue. You're either good at it or you're not. You've either had luck or success with it or you haven't. And I think what we're talking about here is you really need to learn to have that set of skills. And how do you do that? These are the things we're talking about. The different processes you can try to use to get there. Because if you're not, as the folks in chat are talking about, if you're really not at the table, you gotta change your path, the decision table for your customer. You're gonna have to do whatever it takes to do that, right? Find a way to have enough empathy to understand their universe well enough to be able to provide a solution. And then, in some cases, you wind up having to go show them and use layman terms and not technical terms. All of those things take work to get good at. But honestly, that's the only way you're ever going to wind up being in a strategic conversation is if you find the skills to do that. I mean, I don't know any other way to do that either. Those are the decision makers that hold the budget strings, and they're the ones you got to get shaking their head yes at some point. So
And you hit something really well, the empathy level here. One of the things that I'm working off an outline that Wes and I developed, so I'm kind of throwing these guys in here, but the importance of active listening. That if you go in with just your own agenda and that you're going in, here's what you have to say, here's your slides, you will sit, you will listen to what I'm saying. You're not coming in it from a relationship basis. And you know, Wes had brought up the point that having conversations around what are your business objectives for the next year? Where are you growing? What new thing might you be adding? And then the importance of saying, you know what, I'm going to take what you've shared with me. I'm going to go back to my shop. I'm going to come up with a plan that works for where you're headed, that you don't have to solve it for them right there. And that in some cases, you might be leaving something on the table if you don't take time to walk away, come up with a custom plan, not redevelop your entire stack, but if they're adding a new line of business, if they're considering you're growing in this area, there might be opportunity to add more than what you'd originally planned on walking in the door with, but you have to be able to walk away and think about it for a bit. So, and Jared, I like that. Think about a 5-year plan of kind of where do you see your business growing so that you can develop a joint technology plan moving forward. What how did you guys used to? Because I know you weren't always the one having these conversations. You had account managers at your businesses as well. What types of things did you do to encourage active listening?
honestly, we role played the devil out of those. We really spent a lot of time role playing with our sales teams to try and get them to get the feel, have the feel for how these conversations typically go, right? I can tell you. So by the way, another good tactic for being able to start to get some inroads there, you can always ask your customers for a copy of a contract they give to their customers. You know what I mean? Because in some cases, they're agreeing, and this just happened to me yesterday where it popped in my head, is I was sitting with two attorneys and they knew that I was involved in tabletop exercise, and they say, well, what does that really do for you? And I said, well, simple question. I said, well, let me ask you something. When you got up and came over here for lunch, did you log your machine off? or is it going to stay logged on the whole time you're out of your office? He says, oh yeah, it stays logged in. I says, okay. Do you leave your house unlocked, all the time, or do you? So you're locking your house, but not the place where all this really important information is. You know what I mean? And they started dawning on them right away. Hey, wait a minute. I sort of see what he's talking about, but that's because again, we're getting down to this level of empathy. And in order to be able to, even for salespeople to be able to sit in that conversation, they have to be very active listeners, and they have to be really good at asking some very basic questions to do that. And so that's what we did to help them get that set of chops. Was we just role played the devil out of it as much as we possibly could.
And and Jared called it out, like, don't be afraid of silence. Like, and
No,
I
let
think,
it sit there. Let it sit
but
there for a while. Yeah.
but I will talk, and this is my experience being a tech who, I started as a tech, and it was expected I knew the answer. And a lot of
Hmm.
MSPs come up from that tech. And so we think we need to answer that immediately. And that was when I joined Huntress as a sales engineer. One of the early feedbacks I got from one of our account managers, he's like, dude, when somebody asks a question, even if you know the answer, just be quiet. Just set and then repeat it back to them. So you asked this, Becky, you were asking, how do we teach active listening to others? He's like, even if you don't get, he's like, that ability to kind of mimic it back, make sure that you are hearing what their real question is, and B, let you try and ask then a clarifying question underneath it so that you can go, oh, but really, Becky, what are you trying to understand with this? What's your concern from here, right? And so ask that second question, but by being quiet, it allows you to let the person on the other side of the table, if you will, start to talk and give you more information. Um, like, I think that is great. Um, and one of the other things that I saw that worked for like training, you were asking Becky, like, how do you train your teams around this?
Hmm.
Bob's, yes, role playing, but other things I've seen is where we would do ones, and I came from one of my MSPs was a small MSP. We really just had an owner-led sales team, but we did rely on our techs to do some what I'll call soft selling, right? They weren't true salespeople, but and one of the things we would do at times we would have one of those techs be there to listen, kind of watch it in action and learn from. And we said, hey, we're bringing Bob to this meeting. Bob's really going to just take notes, and that's what we kind of ask the tech to be, is kind of that record keeper of what are the key decisions being talked about. But if we prepped our engineers to, hey, this is your role here. You aren't here to answer questions. You're here to actually listen. That helped train them to be better at that skill as well. It there's a cost, right, to that, but like it helped our team get better, where they got more comfortable being in front of our partners. For sure. Um, yeah. And I guess one other thing I'll call out is that whole part of not knowing the answer is so key. So I think that's where letting the space breathe, if you will, which I'm totally not allowing to happen here as I keep talking. But if you let that space breathe, it allows people, you can then quote unquote have that vulnerability, say, you know what, and I just don't know the answer. So like talk to me more about it, right? There's like not knowing the answer and saying, I'm going to need to go back to the office and get you a really firm, good proposal because you gave me a lot to think about. I will almost guarantee 9 out of 10 of your clients are probably going to be like, oh, wow, they actually care. They're going to take that extra step there. So
I like the idea of bringing some other people with you, some on-the-job training, some FaceTime. Uh, I see that even sometimes with some of our team at Huntress, that being a remote company, there isn't a lot of FaceTime with other people, but there's a magic that happens when you can look someone in the eye. So bringing new people in occasionally to events to meet our partners, to understand it's why we bring partners to come in and speak at our annual summit, so that it gives a face to this ambiguous other that you're talking about all the time as a company. So Cody, if you'll pull up the next poll, I think this is a good time for that. And yeah, so what kind of messaging do you think motivates people most to take cybersecurity seriously? And this
Mm.
is, real world stories, personal impact, positive reinforcement, so carrot or stick, and then fear-based warnings about what could go wrong. Um, that feels, I like the order of this. It feels like all positive and then fear-based warnings. So we'll leave that up for a few minutes. The power of storytelling. I think that that is a lost art sometimes in selling. And so, what types of stories have you used? How have you used that in conversations to get your end users to come along on this journey with you?
Yeah, I mean, it is really I can tell you, I'm in the South, right? So I'm in Louisiana. And if you don't come in with a story, they're gonna kick you out of there to begin with, because this is this part of the world is a storytelling part of the world for sure. So it's kind of normal business. It's kind of business is normal for us down here. But I mean, it does being able to talk about things that are relatively close in. So I never try to use examples that are so far away that they're not really relevant to the customer that I'm talking to. I try to find things that are close in, that they've either heard rumors about or knew something was going on, and more or less use those as the basis of kind of explaining, what you can and can't, what you should be thinking about doing. Because here's somebody who had a lot of loss, but if they just had a couple other pieces in their strategy, they could have made that a lot less loss, and done a much better job of getting back up quickly, right? But I think it's whatever stories you tell, they really need to be relevant to the customer. Either make sure they're part of their industry, or make sure that they're something that they are familiar with, that's in their particular region or area, because I think that drives the connectivity. It shows that you're paying attention to what's going on in the local area, not just the national area. So I always try to find some sort of story that's related to what they do, and somewhere close in, to kind of demonstrate. And I'm not really trying to drive fear into them. I'm just telling them what happened as a factual, instance, but close enough geographically that it, and industrial wise, whatever the industry they're in, it's close enough that it makes it relevant to them, because that tends to break down the barriers a lot quicker, right? Because you have something in common. You both have heard or know about this particular instance, and you're giving them more information about how that could have been mitigated even further if they would have followed a couple things. So now you're not calling them out on it. You're just calling out whatever the example that you're using, where they went wrong, right? And people have no trouble listening to where other people went wrong. They got like no tolerance for hearing where they're going wrong, but they have all kinds of tolerance for hearing where other people went wrong. So
And to that point, like I think Bob, to that story, and you were talking about crafting, and I see it in chat as well. Like it is about business outcomes. It's not just a real world scenario, but it's like, you know, so it's not that X business experienced a ransomware event that you read about or something, but it's what's that impact on the business? Like really getting the stories that work or have the impact are ones where you can talk about the business impact, or, if it's soon enough, the lack of business impact, right? It was a preventative tool in place that mitigated a business impact, right? And stopped it. I mean, and I'll give a shout out to you, Bob, and what you're doing at IR Games is that this is where tabletops come into play, right? Because tabletops, especially what you're developing, are a place where you can take incidents and craft them to a customer so that they can think about those impacts on their business and how they would deal with this. And so it takes, uh, you know, the storytelling, and I mean, maybe Bob, you talk a little bit about the whole game, the way that you are approaching it through the game idea, which I know Becky and I first had this crazy idea. We just threw it against the wall, but like we didn't have a method to do game-based tabletops. We just didn't know anything better. But like, I think that's a key part of getting people's hooks in so they understand, can take a story and relate to it. Do
yeah.
you want to talk a little bit about just some of the research and study
Mhm.
you've done? Because I know you geek
Yeah.
out on this.
Well, I mean, yeah, and I could burn up a lot of time, so I'll try to keep it simple
No, please.
because it is, I live, breathe, and eat this right every day and have for the last few years. So when I was in the MSP, I was facing the same challenge that we're talking about here. How do we get the decision makers to be not just analytically connected to the situation and doing math to evaluate it? How do I get them emotionally engaged in this process? Because people who've never gone through an incident have no feel for it. They have no idea what happens when something like this affects their organization. They just really have no feel for it whatsoever. It's like asking me what it's like to walk on the moon. I've got no context. I have no idea what that. I don't know how hard it is to get there. I don't know how hard it is to get back. So I just go, nah, I don't think it's worth the trouble. You know what I mean? But when you do things like we basically brought tabletops into the digital age because that is the age that we live in. And a lot of that, the core parts of it are based in storytelling and illustrating what goes on in the full span of a security incident. And that means everything, because really most people don't know this ratio, but only about 20% of an incident is technical. It's only about 20% of dealing with an incident is technical. It's 80% everything else, like HR and cash flow and employee stress and culture and reputational harm and stability harm and everything. PR, communications plans. How do I interact with attorneys? When do I need to do that? Why do I need to do it at this point in time? There's so much more outside of the scope of just telling people, hey, you need to have EDR or MDR, and that'll, that's all you got to do. Just buy MDR, EDR, and that's going to cut out a lot of the risk out. They don't have any emotional connection to be able to tell if that extra $3 a month or $2 a month is really giving them any value. So that was the approach that I took as part of an MSP, is to basically, as a nights and weekends project, we kind of worked on the system that studies gamification tactics, not to make it toy-like or anything like that. These gamification has to do with how do you address the motivations of the individuals that are taking part in something, right? So, and knowing what core motivations motivate people, and how do you tie that to, how do you keep it so simple that I'm saying this, C-level people are going to be sending me dirty mail, but how do you keep it simple enough that a C-level person is willing to take a shot at it? Because by the way, the truth of the matter is they really do want to know. They just don't know how to ask. They don't know they don't want to have to ask for help outright, usually, because that makes them feel like they're weak. And a lot of C-level people kind of get stuck in that rut, right? So if you can get them into an experience that makes it easy for them to be a part of, doesn't take a tremendous amount of time, 2 hours, that's it. Go through it. If you can get them into a system like that, whether that's physical tabletop or digital one, doesn't really matter. If you can get them into that exercise, then they're going to become way more emotionally engaged when they start realizing what all these what the ramifications of this other 80% really looks like when you don't take it into account, right? And that goes back to IR plans. That goes back to practicing those IR plans, all core things that we all know everybody should do. But the truth of the matter is only about 20% of small businesses, there's 16 million of them, by the way, only about that have cyber insurance. There's more small businesses, but there's about 16 million of them with cyber insurance. Only about 20% of them have ever dealt with getting an IR plan, and fewer than that have actually practiced that plan. So that speaks to the need and the demand that's out there. So we've been in search of a way to connect that emotional aspect to what really goes on in these security incidents. And it has finally, I think we have finally found the right balance. But it uses gamification techniques to make it easy and engaging, tells a story, throws a lot of curveballs at them, puts stress on them by not giving them all the time in the world. You never have enough resources. You have too many things to do. We simulate all that. And that's when all of the armor goes away, and they start really engaging and being the thought leaders that they need to be for the organization. Up until that point, they never felt anything like that. And I think that is the thing you have to do. You have to find whatever that method is for you that works for you. You have to find that kind of a method to be able to get them to emotionally engage in how bad things can be, but they can be mitigated if you do things like IR plans in practice. So.
So, we've done a lot with the IR games. Excuse me, I'm choking on my tea right now. So if, if I have to mute, please keep talking.
Yeah.
Early in my time at Huntress, I'd interviewed a few partners, and they'd asked for even a cost of downtime calculator that made sense to their industry.
Mm-hmm.
So often, a lot of the online resources you can find or the stories that you can easily find online aren't applicable because they're enterprise level companies.
Mm-hmm.
We used the thing a long time ago that I heard it in a hallway, and it was, you're not too big to be breached. You're just too big to make the front page of the paper about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, one MSP had used an example with me that he walked into a pitch meeting with a new prospect and was like, this would be your cost of downtime for a business your size. And he got laughed out of the meeting because it was like 10x their annual revenue. And so, you know, having those stories, having those scenarios that are relevant to that customer, that audience is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And then I really like the idea of using tabletop games to kind of pivot from that. It's not if, but when. It is if, but when. But then when this happens, how do we react?
Mm-hmm.
What happens? And how can we better prepare as a group to 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 plan for that?
Yeah.
So I think that you've created a really great environment for that with IR games. Ethan, we built the board game last year. I got to play it last week with actual end user customers. I went to an event and we played it with a group of about 30 end user customers, and they all walked away going, oh, having these plans would help. It's like, yes, having documented incident response plans, disaster recovery, all of those things really helps you with that 80% of that. And Bob, I'm stealing that 2080 number because that's a good one.
It is. Well, it's a true number. So yeah, by all
Yeah,
means.
and that 80% is the number the customer can impact. The
Mhm.
20% is your job. That's the MSP, it's the technical
That's
side
right.
of it. But in an incident, you can't just swoop in and fix it all. There's other parts that happen. So, oh, audience who's been very active today, I'm going to play a little game here. Wes had agreed to this. Bob and Ethan agreed to it as well. So we'll see how it goes. But
We were voluntold. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, exactly. I am not Wes Spencer. I just want it for the record, not Wes
Yeah.
Spencer right here.
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
all need
Okay.
those t-shirts now.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in the chat, guys, if you want to drop a technical term or a conversation that you've had with a customer that you struggle to pivot to get them to understand it, if you want to drop those in, we can come back to that as we keep talking. So we'll
These are
pick a
your
couple of those.
these would be your stump Wes Spencer questions of how would Wes have answered this type of thing. Which is why I am putting the caveat on. I am definitely not Wes Spencer, nor is Bob Wes Spencer.
Yeah. Well,
No one is Wes Spencer.
No one is Wes Spencer.
So we talked a bit about empathy, though, and how building empathy is one of the most powerful and quite underrated security skills. In some of this, you're also talking a bit that you can help with tabletop exercise, you can also help your customers have some empathy back as well. That in the middle of this is the chaos that is created. Bob, you brought up the example of bringing your technical folks on site with you to
Mhm.
listen. What are some other ways that you helped build empathy in your team, especially your technicians that are first line on the phone with your customers on some of those worst days? What are some of the ways that you interjected empathy and taught that inside of your organizations?
Yeah. For us, the best tactic was to we actually cycled our technical people to do ride-alongs with our salespeople periodically. By the way, we also had the salespeople sit in customer service periodically too, answering the phones, right? So that they could see from different perspectives. So, but there's no substitute for firsthand experience sitting and listening to a conversation. And then, we tell them, make notes about what you see and what you don't see. And we tell them up front, how do you think people are feeling when they're talking? Look at them and tell us what you think. Just simple, basic observational sort of tactics. It doesn't need to be highly complex. And it can be spread out over time, so it's not detrimental to the organization. But just being in rooms where other people are interacting, with customers, they learn a tremendous amount about how to actually interact with those folks. And especially when we have really bad, because we've had several, when I was at with the MSP, there was a number of incidents that occurred with customers that we weren't doing security for, and they just had nobody else to turn to, and they would call us, and then we would go in to try and get them back up. Well, we made sure that we involved as many people as we could during those, because you learn a lot when the flames are looking. When you realize a college has been ransomware 2 weeks before registration starts,
Ooh.
there's a you don't have to really even be paying attention good to get a lot of the feel about how stressful and potentially difficult this kind of a situation is. So we just try to include as many people as we can in a passive mode, listen and learn mode when we go through these, because they happen frequently enough that you can get everybody. You Unfortunately, they happen frequently enough that you can get everybody through a couple experiences, and then they start feeling that as they start feeling that and start responding with much more empathy once they've kind of seen those things play out in real life.
Yeah, I mean, I think you to help teach your team empathy, right, is what you're wondering about, Becky. Like, I think
Mhm.
it is like talking through and having debriefs as well as a team. Like, hey, how could we handle this better? Like, even if you never deal with a mass ransomware or a ransomware for a client, but how could have we handled X better? Because um, I think it's very easy from a tech side, and I'll own this as being from my MSP tech days, where I'd be like, it's those darn end users. Like, if only we didn't have end users, we wouldn't have a problem, right? And at the end of the day, it's not that the end users are the problem. Like, they are a target for a cybersecurity aspect. Like, the threat actors realize that humans are a huge market opportunity. Um, but it really is more pointing to a systematic issue that needs to be addressed versus a person. It's not that Bob is intentionally trying to click on that phishing email or isn't thinking about it. It's probably because we have a system in place that isn't setting Bob up for success to identify that social engineered website that he's gone to, because we've put in place other stressors on the system, or we haven't built a culture around cybersecurity. And so, how to teach the team empathy was like, all right, let's step back. And uh, when so and so called in with, even if, as I said, it wasn't a security thing, what is a way to see this from that end user view versus our perspective as we have to fix it almost? Um, yeah, but I mean, and Bob, I mean, I know you know the numbers around, uh, how much systems are so key to
Right.
success versus, if you just address the person, you're just playing whack-a-mole at that point.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't fix the problem. It doesn't fix the core root of the problem. If you're going to do the five whys to really figure out what went wrong, at the point where it started requiring human judgment to move the ball from A to B, and it could have been a system doing that, then that's a failure. That's a failure on the system, not on the employees, right? So you have to always be thinking in terms of that. Um, because again, I tried to engineer everything so that our people could not fail. But the one thing you can't engineer is what Becky's been talking about, is them having empathy for the people that they're talking to. That's something that there's never going to be a complete substitute for that. And as much as we use AI agents now, and have for a long time for support, you always need to have a human at the helm. I won't even say human in the middle. I'm going to say human at the helm, because you need some people who have real judgment to know when to intercede. And because what makes this work is when a human has empathy for another human being. It's fine to use automated tools, but it doesn't take the place of somebody who really cares about the customer and what they do for a living. And that has to be, if you don't have that capability by default, then the organization needs to understand that, include you in activities that help you get better at that.
Well, you hit something though that, understanding where your customer's coming from. Nothing is more frustrating than reaching out to IT and having the first thing they ask say, "Did you turn it off and turn it back on again?" I don't know much about technology. I know that much. Like, I've done that step already.
Yeah.
And so, teaching people to have conversations with that person calling in really does, you know, it elevates the conversation, and you can have a different perspective on it. So in the 45 minutes that you had to prep for this call, was there anything else that you thought of when we were talking about how do you humanize cybersecurity? Do you think that we've gotten better as an industry in humanizing cybersecurity, or do we still have a long way to go?
That's a good question. Is it better than it was last year or 2 years ago? I think yeah, it is. I think the bigger problem is that the types of attack vectors are also expanding at a rate that's faster than how we're starting to mature as a culture about handling them. So there's always going to be that tension about, okay, I can talk about these things really well because I know enough about them and I know enough about my customers to be able to do that. But then when you look at like AI being used on these advanced attack vectors now, and the deep faking videos, deep fake, all of the other stuff, still a relatively new thing. So now we got to all be tooled for that as well, right? So it's always going to be a challenge. It's never going to be so stable that you can rest on your laurels. This is going to be a battle from now on. But in general, I can tell you this, not anecdotally, because I can say this, that the conversations around tabletop exercises and the need for them, that has in the last 3 years, it's 10 times better than it was 3 years ago as far as that conversation goes, and people understanding the need. Now, I don't know that it's reflected in the number of people taking part yet, but the dialogue is much more common nowadays, right? And that's what you're looking for, because action follows theory. And so the theory's out there and have been out there for quite a while, but now the action is going to start catching up with it, which I think that's the place where we're at. But I mean, as you pointed out, this is an evolving landscape. So every day we wake up on a different side of the moon, right? When we're dealing with this. So
Yeah. And I mean, I do think I would agree with Bob that I think we are starting to get more empathetic because we are realizing, I'm back in the old days when Bob and I have a little bit of gray in our hair. Like it was a time when we would throw just a solution at a problem. And we've realized that throwing uh, a piece of software, a piece of hardware at the problem wasn't actually fixing it. And it's through that empathy that you start to actually drive and understand system processes, in my opinion. Like I think that's the key. It's through, if you have empathy, that's giving you that space we talked about, taking that pause. All of that helps you kind of see the problem from all sides
mhm.
and wander around it and look at it. And I do think that the better MSPs at least, the better vendors, the better people out there in the space are taking that kind of slower approach because they realize it's a system issue that you need to address. And that ties right back into your partner's, your client's business. Like, because if it's a system, now you're trying to address what is that systematic issue they're trying to fix from there. Um, yeah, that would be my sense around it.
No, thank you both very much for joining today. Thank you everyone for joining us. These guys did amazing. Please come back and join us again next month. We'll be talking about incident response plans in November. So nice follow-up to this conversation. And have a great rest of your day, week, and month. And we'll see you again so very soon.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Hi, everyone.